Hi friends, welcome to EduChums. This video is about the Renaissance in England, which is a part of MEG1 British Poetry course. Let's find out first of all, what was the Renaissance? The word Renaissance literally means rebirth. The Renaissance was a period, it was a time period in European history that was marked by a lot of changes in the political, social, cultural, and economic scenario in all of Europe. So something important to understand over here with reference to Renaissance is that Renaissance did not take place in only one part of Europe. It took place in all of Europe. However, in MEG1, the focus is on Renaissance in England. But initially, we need to have a clear understanding of what the Renaissance was exactly. What were the changes it brought about? Why did it exist? What was the aim behind it? What were the changes? Because changes in one part of Europe brought about changes in other parts of Europe as well. Now, what are some key things when we talk about Renaissance? What were some key points that we must remember? That it was associated with discovery of new continents. So no small changes are associated with Renaissance. It was not a period where one change took place or two changes took place. Renaissance brought about a lot of changes in all of Europe. So some key points, some key changes that were there, which we must remember are the discovery of new continents, decline in feudal system, like in India also, in Indian history also, we have seen the zamindari system. Feudal system used to exist. Similarly, there was a feudal system where there was a landlord and there were farmers, and the landlord ended up exploiting the farmers. The farmer used to earn very low wages, very little bit of money, and did all the work, while the landlord just enjoyed the rent in a way and the money which came out of the efforts of the farmer. So there was decline in feudal system, which means there was improvement in the condition of the poor sections of society, the marginalized sections of society. There was rise in innovations also during this period. Now we know that innovations can only take place when there is rise in scientific thinking. So this means during the time of Renaissance there was improvement in scientific thinking in the world, and then there was a very important invention during this time, which was the invention of the printing press. Thanks to rise in printing press, Renaissance could get spread quite easily to different parts of the world. And there was also a very important invention, which was invention of gunpowder. Now, gunpowder means power. It brings power in the hands of the owners of that gunpowder. So this brought about changes in the political scenario, because anyone could now acquire gunpowder. Anyone, meaning any country, could acquire gunpowder and become powerful. It could protect itself against threats. So this too was a very important invention. And then there was a revival in classical thinking. People started respecting the classical learning, the wisdom that they had inherited from their previous generations. So Renaissance is not just something where we can say that everything old was thrown into the dustbin and everything was new. No, we noticed that there was revival in classical learning and wisdom as well, which was taking place. So that is why it was a period of great amount of changes. If we talk specifically now, if we come to Renaissance in England, which is the focus in the MEG1 course of British poetry, Renaissance in England specifically, the first point to remember is that Renaissance did not take place at the same time in different parts of Europe. It took place in different parts of Europe at different points in time. However, this had an impact on the Renaissance which took place later in the other parts. So same way we see that when Renaissance took place in England, it was influenced by the impacts of Renaissance that had already taken place in other parts of Europe. Some key point that we see when we talk about Renaissance in England, the first point that comes to mind is humanism, rise in humanism, which is focus on the well-being of the human, being good to the human, rather than coming up with things or laws or religious practices which harm the human in one way or the other. The key feature in Renaissance, something which we must remember, is rise in humanism. How human being is important, how being good to the human being is important. And there was another thing which took place, which is completely mainly related to the religion aspect, Christianity more specifically speaking, that the harshness that was there in Christianity, people used to justify the harsh things they did by, condemning certain acts. And then this period saw a rise in the Protestant movement in the church. So there was the Catholic Church and there was the Protestant Church. So there was a questioning which took place. People developed the courage to question the practices of the church, which was a very big thing because before that nobody had dared to question those practices. And then, along with that, the courage, the national identity got developed in England. Again, before this period, there were different classes in England. There was the rich, there was the poor, there was a bit of a middle class. So they did not have, they seemed to be living completely different lives. But during the time of Renaissance, there was a common English identity which started to get formed. It was not fully developed during this period, but at least it started to get formed during this Renaissance period in England. Another impact of the English Renaissance was the rise of the English language itself. Rise of English language in this case doesn't mean that the use increased in terms of volume of use. It means rise in the status of the English language. Before this period, the learning and the literature, the high quality literature, the respected literature usually was written in Latin or Italian or was French also for that matter. But for the first time during this period in Renaissance, important Latin works and important Italian works were translated into English. So this led to a rise in the respect for the English language. And after this conversion, after this translation happened and it became popular, English writers also people started writing in the English language. There was new development in the field of literature where writers, poets started using English as the primary language. Now, we must remember to link this with the invention of the printing press because that also had a huge role to play in the rise of the English language as a language for literature. So this was a change with respect to the level of the status that English language enjoyed in England during the period of Renaissance. We've just talked about the printing press. Renaissance and the printing press are closely interlinked with each other because Renaissance was a period where changes took place at a mass level. They did not take place in one segment of society or one area of society. During the time of Renaissance, there were mass level changes. Everything and everyone seemed to be getting affected by those changes. This was really propagated because of the invention of the printing press. If there was no printing press available, if there were not books, if there were not newspapers, etc., getting printed, it would have been almost impossible for people to transmit their messages from one person to the other. So, poets, writers, thinkers, politicians, activists kind of people, people who wanted to work for social reform, people who wanted to see religious changes, they started using the power of the media to influence society at large. And people also, because it was new, just like in current times, the internet enjoyed a great rise, a lot of success because it was something new. Similarly, because the printing press was something new, it was amazing for people to be connected in this way to the ideas of other people through written works. So, rise of printing press had a huge role to play in bringing about Renaissance in Europe. Now let's talk about the social and political aspects. Both the Renaissance, which is a broad term comprising a lot of changes, social, political, economical, religious, scientific changes, changes in the very nature of people, and the Reformation Now, Reformation is a term essentially concerned with religious changes only, how the church underwent a change, how people changed their religious beliefs. Both these movements brought about a lot of changes in the English society. Now, if we talk about the social changes, the economic changes more specifically, the scenario was that there were a lot of small time farmers, marginal farmers, tenant sort of farmers who used to work, who used to labor for the rich squires, the rich landlords, who used to pay them very little for all their efforts. So these poor tenant farmers had become the marginalized section of society, the deprived section of society, who were hit the worst anytime there was an epidemic like the plague, etc. There was hardly any improvement in their life. So when the Renaissance came, people and the movement of humanism came, people developed a newfound respect for themselves, for their own lives. So they moved away from being tenant farmers and they moved into other economic activities, like some became artisans, some became craftspeople, some moved in, became in animal farmers. They moved, they reared sheep, and this led to the rise of the wool industry. So these small time tenant farmers became few in number. The numbers reduced, and we know that when the demand goes high but the supply is less, then the price increases for any commodity or any section of society. So this led to improvement in the lives of the small tenant farmers because they could charge higher rates from the squires and the noble landlords since the demand had gone up but supply was less. So this gave more money to them. This was a major change. These tenant farmers gradually purchased their own small patches of land and they became small farmers. So from tenant farmers, they moved into a better category of farmers called yeomen or small time farmers. If we come to the Elizabethan court, a trend which is seen in the literature, in poetry, in writers, was self-deprecation when they tried to project themselves as very humble people, when they did not have that ego or pride that they wanted to project themselves as the elite. So the writers and the poets projected themselves in a light of self deprecation. Self deprecation means when you're putting yourself only down, when you're putting yourself as projecting yourself as a very humble person, not as a very proud sort of person. Self deprecation, humiliating themselves only in their works. So when they projected themselves in the Elizabethan court, this was a trend which we notice. And when we will study Spencer's poetry further in this particular course, we will notice these kind of patterns of self deprecation. And this was not just in the work of Spencer, this can be seen in other Renaissance courtiers as well, in their works as well, how they're projecting themselves as being very humble people. Now we talk about something political and social, nationalism in Europe. The period of Renaissance brought the people of England together like never before. Earlier, before Renaissance, there were categories, there were divisions in English society between the feudal landlords, the oppressed sections of society, the elite. So there were a lot of clear demarcations, a lot of divisions in society. But as a result of the Renaissance, there was the rise of the national spirit when the English started to see each person in England as being English. Something to remember here is that this nationalism was not developed during Renaissance. It was just the beginning of nationalism. The beginning started, it got sparked off, and printing press had a lot to do with this. Humanism had a lot to do with this. Rise in the economic level of the English also played a role in this. That summarizes the entire learning related to the Renaissance period for the MEG course. Remember to subscribe to this video for more. Thanks for watching EduCharms.